Alright, so I decided to take a few days off work and visit my family in Nsama District of Northern Province. My parents recently relocated there from the Copper Belt and I haven't seen them since. Accompanied by my brother, we traveled for 14 hours to Kasama. Before getting to Kasama, we make stops in Kapiri and Impika, where we indulged in some pretty dry, overpriced pastries. But that's not news when it comes to road food in Zambia. So we touched base in Kasama at 17 hours and proceed to Nsama, where we arrive at 23. The following morning, we are all excited to see each other. My sister graces us with some tea and breakfast sandwiches, which will be a staple for the rest of our stay here in summer. Before running off to work, my mom wastes no time putting me to work. She had already placed an order for a live layer chicken, which catches me off guard because slaughtering chickens is not my area of expertise. I tried to get someone else to do it, but they all chicken out, so I gather all my strength and slaughter the bird. As terrible as this feels in the moment, I can't help but feel a sense of accomplishment as well, because this is something that I had to do eventually. At this point, the water is already boiling on the brazier. I put the carcass in a dish, then pour the scorching hot water all over it. This makes it easier to pluck out the feathers. After plucking, I remove the insides, then give the chicken a thorough rinse. My sister helps me hold the chicken as we break it down into several pieces. I toss the chicken into a medium-sized pot and add 2 cups of water and 3 teaspoons of salt. I then put the lid on and leave it to boil. 30 minutes into boiling, I'm feeling conflicted. On one hand, my ancestors are calling for me to keep it simple, to keep it natural. But on the other hand, I can't resist the creative urge to mix it up and toss in a bunch of spices. So I toss in a teaspoon of turmeric, a teaspoon of cumin seeds, and a teaspoon of MSG. I close it up and leave it to boil for another 15 minutes. So after a total of 45 minutes, I dump out the chicken and the broth, then put the pot back on the fire. I add a few tablespoons of cooking oil, then toss the chicken in to fry. In hindsight, I could have skipped the frying process entirely and it wouldn't have made much of a difference. After frying the chicken, I take it out of the pot, remove a bit of oil, then add in 2 diced medium-sized onions and 3 diced cloves of garlic. I fry for a few minutes before adding in 3 diced medium-sized tomatoes. I toss in a teaspoon of salt as well. I fry until the tomatoes are cooked, then toss the chicken and the broth back in. I mix everything nice and proper, then let it boil for another 30 minutes. At this point, the gravy has thickened and the chicken is super tender. It is ready. Shortly after, my mom is back in time to give us a little tour of our garden. She tells us about how rich the Nsama soil is and how easily things grow there. She brags about how this garden has provided and is still providing for my family. She tells us about her plans of diversifying and expanding this sanctuary. Before leaving the garden, I decide to harvest some okra to go with the chicken. My brother Chile decides to take over and make his classic fried okra recipe. After cutting the okra into small pieces, he puts a small pot on a brazier, then adds in 5 tablespoons of cooking oil. He tosses in 1 diced medium-sized onion and fries it until translucent. He then adds in 2 diced medium-sized tomatoes, fries until cooked, then tosses in the okra. He stir-fries the okra, closing the lid on the pot occasionally so the okra can steam. After about 15 minutes, the okra is ready. Despite being tired from work, my mom does us the honor of cooking the nsima. Once it's done, I serve everything up in some bowls. We all sit down and enjoy the meal as a family. Everything is banging. There is absolutely nowhere else I would rather be. After the meal, the boys and I head out to a local liquor store. We drown ourselves in the cheapest booze we can find. A perfect ending to the day. It's the morning of day 2 in Nsama District and there's a heavy downpour. It quickly transformed into scorching and unforgiving heat. Such is the norm around these parts. Before my mom jogs for work, she casually asked if I had spotted the kafulu delele in the garden, knowing full well that I wouldn't resist the temptation to harvest and cook it. I head to the garden and lo and behold, the biggest kafulu delele leaves I've ever seen. I pluck the stems with the matted leaves off and place them on a tray. And as I have learned from my previous videos on kafulu and the advice from the Hungry AF community, the best way to clean this is to let the sand dry off in the sun, then pat it off with the hand. Washing this delele doesn't get the sand off. The delele becomes slimy immediately you introduce water to it, hence the dirt remains trapped in. Another thing about this delele is that it's super slimy, and of the many suggestions that the Hungry AF community has given me in terms of reducing the sliminess, the prominent one has been to mix it with pumpkin leaves, aka chihuahua. Leaves dusted and plucked off the stems. I add a cup of water to a pot, then toss in a teaspoon of salt. As soon as the water starts to simmer, I toss in the kafulu leaves and the chihuahua that I've cut into strips. I add 2 large diced tomatoes and 2 teaspoons of salt. Stirring it around continuously, I cook it for 10 minutes before it is ready. To go with the delele, my mom had left beans cooking on the brazier overnight. She had already added the cooking oil, so all I had to do was add 3 diced tomatoes, 2 diced onions, 5 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of smoked paprika, a teaspoon of MSG, a teaspoon of cumin seeds, and poured in a bunch of water. After 30 minutes, the beans was thick and everything had mixed in nice and proper. well. I served it all up, and much to my frustration, everyone decided to eat at their own time. But despite that, I'm happy to say everyone enjoyed this meal. The next few days were pretty easygoing. I spent them enjoying the surroundings and taking in the scenery. I wish I could have stayed longer, but I am very appreciative of the little time that I got to spend with my family during this festive period. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.